And that is it for this course section. We now had a detailed look at file-based routing and how we set up pages and how we navigate between pages with Next.js. We had a look at the pages directory and that the files and folders in there have a special meaning. Index.js is always treated as a root page for the given folder, so either the overall root page, if it's an index.js file in pages, or in portfolio or other subfolders, index.js would be loaded for /portfolio/nothing. We also can have other file names to, for example, load /portfolio/list and then load this list page component. And we can also have dynamic segments by enclosing placeholder identifiers in square brackets and then loading different kinds of data for different concrete values we might be getting. And we get access to the concrete value entered for a path segment through the useRouter hook, as you learned. Now we can also have nested dynamic segments, as we did with clients. And we can also have such catch-all files here by having square brackets and then 3 dots in front of any identifier of our choice. And that allows us to catch multiple dynamic segments in one go. And all these are very powerful features for loading pages in exactly the way you need. Now for navigating around, we want to use the link component provided by Next.js. Or if we need to navigate programmatically, we can do that through that router object, which we get through useRouter, or in class-based components through the withRouter higher order component. And therefore we now know what file-based routing is and how that works. But is that now better than the code-based approach we know from standard React projects that do not use Next.js? Ultimately, that is of course up to you to decide, but I want to give you my perspective on that and a small comparison I came up with. When we compare file-based routing, which we get with Next.js, to this standard code-based routing we have in standard React apps with React Router, then in the case of file-based routing, we have no extra boilerplate code that needs to be written. So this kind of route configuration, which we need to write in our React components when using React Router, that is not required with Next.js and a file-based routing system. Instead of writing this boilerplate code, we simply create component files, which we would need to do anyways, and we just store them in a structure that replicates the path we want to have in our URL in the end. And that, in my opinion, is a very natural way of, well, setting up our page components and of storing our page components. So therefore, we do something we need to do anyways, and we save the other part of creating extra code just to tell React which component should be loaded for which path. We combine that into one step instead. Therefore, in my opinion, that's a very intuitive system of creating components and of storing components and of setting up routing. Therefore, we don't need to do anything for that. We get the routing for free, if you want to call it like that. So with file-based routing, the file and folder structure we have is everything. That influences our routes, and we therefore fully control the paths we support in our application through our folder structure in that pages folder. Now, for navigating around, we use a link component, and we can also navigate imperatively, so there's nothing special about that. Now, for code-based routing, we do have that extra boilerplate set up in code. Though, of course, you could argue that by doing that, you have some code where you can see which routes are supported. You don't need to look at the file system, though I would argue that looking at the file system wouldn't be too difficult. But of course, ultimately, that's of course up to you to judge. Now, it is definitely straightforward, don't get me wrong, but it includes new components and concepts which you need to learn, like that switch component and that route component, and how to order your routes, and so on. So that can be annoying. Now, a potential advantage, of course, is that the file and folder setup does not matter at all. in my opinion, having the folder structure dictate the paths is an advantage, but you could see this as a disadvantage as well. And with code-based routing, you can store your component files wherever you want. They won't have any influence on your routes or your paths. Now, navigation works pretty much as it does with Next.js. You have a link component and you can also navigate imperatively there, so no differences there. Therefore, overall, in my opinion, file-based routing is more intuitive and is easier to set up, but it is of course up to you to judge. Either way, it is how Next.js thinks about pages and routes, and therefore when working with Next.js, you want to embrace that file-based approach.